Hello and welcome to another in the series Real Talk in the Face of Danger. It's a podcast by the Department of Emergency Management. I am Diane Fort, and today we are looking at gender in disaster management. Our special guest is Ms. Elizabeth Riley, who is the Executive Director of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, also known simply as CDEMA. Ms. Riley, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
First of all, why is gender in disaster management even a key issue?
Well, thanks, Diane. I think the first thing we have to start by talking about is what really is gender. And when we talk about gender, we're really talking about the roles and responsibilities that society ascribes to you, whether you're a male or whether you're a female. So it's a social construct, and it's something that changes over time. So in the time of our parents, the things that women did was very different to what women do today. And this has implications for disaster management because it assists in guiding decisions that persons will take during an event, after an event. We find, for example, that men might be more inclined to take risks during a disaster event, like going on the outside and trying to put the galvanized back on the top of the roof in the middle of a hurricane or a storm. And these are some of the things that we see during events in the region.
Okay, so then it almost presupposes like perhaps women might be more vulnerable. Is that where this is headed?
In some ways, yes. I think that one of the things we've seen is that there's, for example, different statistics. If you look at the number of female-headed households in the region, is something that's been trending upwards. The implications of that in the times of disaster is that often if you have women being the main breadwinner after an event and they've lost their jobs, it has specific implications for the household. It also has implications with respect to recovery, because a lot of the jobs, for example, in the aftermath of a disaster event tend to be in the areas of construction. And traditionally, you would find that women are not the key persons that you would find in that type of industry. It would be more along the male side. So when you're looking at post-recovery and looking at efforts to reemploy persons, you do have to take into consideration the type of work that men do versus the type of work that women do. And women traditionally, for example, are caregivers. And a lot of us, myself, for example, as a mother, we do what is called unpaid care work. We look after our children, we look after our grandparents, and that tends traditionally to fall in the hands of the female. And post-disaster, what you often see is that if arrangements are not in place for children to go back to school, and we even saw it during COVID-19, where when we had children being at home, yes, it resulted in challenges, particularly for women who do a lot of the home care, in being able to find arrangements for their children. And it happens in almost every disaster scenario, not just pandemics.
So it sounds like something that is more than just for a disaster agency like CDEMA, but that Caribbean governments, and because we're looking at the Caribbean experience, because we recognize that these gender issues impact across the world, but certainly we're looking at here the Caribbean, it looks like you would have to have some government support or dialogue or intervention in some way to enact perhaps the legislation or the changes that are necessary to ensure that women are not like disadvantaged, if you want to put it that way. You tell me.
Yeah, absolutely. And because in this region we have such a complex multi-hazard environment, in recent years we have particularly seen it, I think maybe in the last 18 months, with a pandemic followed by a volcanic eruption. On the heels of that were severe weather events and hurricanes.
We've had
and now most recently an earthquake in Haiti. So we have a very complex multi-hazard environment, and it means that at any given time there's the possibility for hazards to impact any of our territories. And given those correlations that I just spoke about in terms of how the disasters can impact men and women differently, it is very important for gender to be considered at a policy level within countries. And policy is, of course, supported by legislation as well. So these are some of the things that governments in the region do need to look at, and I think in a very deliberate way.
Okay, so what actions has CDEMA been taking to try to integrate gender in disaster management?
So our regional strategy for comprehensive disaster management, which currently applies for the period 2014 to 2024, it identifies gender as a cross-cutting issue. And we have been integrating gender considerations into the work that the agency does. Most recently, with the support of the Government of Canada through Global Affairs Canada, we in fact now have a gender specialist on board at the agency for the first time. And we have been heavily focused on revising a number of the standard documents or guiding documents that we have prepared for the region to make sure that gender-related issues are integrated. In addition, we have set up a few years ago, actually back in 2007, what is called a gender working group. And this working group looks at broad disaster risk management issues and the integration of gender into those actions, whether it be in any phase of the disaster management cycle: preparedness, response, recovery, or mitigation.
You know, in listening to you, it almost seems to me like it's something that you really need to discuss at every level. As you said, it seems like policies almost when you're getting into the workforce that you have to start to consider this as you like it can't be just a level platform, because it isn't a level platform. So it just comes across that way to me. What are some of the immediate needs of the local population to chart a gender responsive way forward, you would say?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is really related to the importance of the gathering sex disaggregated data, because this is the first step in getting an insight as to the types of decisions that you need to make. And this is the simplest and sort of the most basic application of considering the gender issues. In addition, there are areas with respect to gender-based violence. And I think these are of particular concern in this region because domestic violence affects 1 in 3 women in the Caribbean. And that's a study by UN ECLAC. And we have seen some of these issues arise, for example, in shelter situations, in the aftermath of events in some of our countries, and that needs to be very deliberate. I think it's also about making sure that we're undertaking the necessary education campaigns as well as advocacy at the highest political levels to make sure that the issue is continuously highlighted. And some of the other areas that we've been delivering on this are through partnerships and also working with community-based organizations as well.
Gender in disaster management is an important issue, an important topic, and we're happy to share it with you right here, Real Talk in the Face of Danger, on this podcast series by the Department of Emergency Management with our special guest, Miss Elizabeth Riley, Executive Director of CDEMA. Join us for part 2 as we continue to examine this issue.